We analyzed what went wrong for the Baltimore Ravens in their 42-38 collapse against the Miami Dolphins in Week 2 with a very special guest next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in today, making us your first listen of the day here on Locked On Ravens. We're free and available on all platforms, including over on YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players. If they score more or less in their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First time users can receive 100% instant deposit match with $100 with promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com. Promo code Locked On. And we're back after what was a very epic collapse for the Baltimore Ravens, a 42-38 loss. And here with us to break it all down, analyze what happened, what went wrong, is one of the boys over at Baltimore Beatdown, the Baltimore Beatdown podcast, and Jake Louque. Jake, I'm excited to have you on. You providing your analysis and your opinions here on just what in the world we saw in that game against the Dolphins.
Well, first of all, I got to comment on those ad reading skills. I mean, that's like some pretty professional level stuff right there. So I got to give you credit for that. And it took my mind for at least a minute off of what happened yesterday with that 42-38 loss that you mentioned there. It's something that we went on deep on our show that you mentioned, and something that I actually wrote a little bit extensively about as well today. Just a gut-wrenching kind of gut check type of loss. It feels like some soul searching is required right now. I'm sure we're going to get into all of that. But yeah. Weird feeling here on this Monday night.
I know it, and any distraction to take our minds off of what we witnessed in that fourth quarter. I mean, a 21-point lead gone. It just felt, and you could name, I said this, you could name like 10 worst things about this game, but I think one of the worst for me was just the inevitability of seeing Tua trot out on that field in a tie game and just thinking the defense has no way to stop what's about to happen. And we saw just methodical marching down the field. But Jake, that also doesn't take away from the fact that on the offensive side of the ball, we saw another pretty terrible performance from this run game, a run game that just isn't existent right now. You take out Lamar Jackson's rushing stats, you have 16 carries for 36 yards for a team that established their dominance in 2019 and 2020, and we saw it. They missed J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards sorely here. How are you kind of coping with this run game being so bad right now? Because it is taking away, I think, from the offense and how good of a performance Lamar Jackson had, especially in this game.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to completely gloss over it, especially if you consider it in the context of the fact that you had so many feast or famine drives in this game where you go out there and you chew 10 minutes off the clock on one of them and you don't score a touchdown. And then you have other ones that are like one play and a touchdown or two plays and a touchdown with the Rashad Bateman long one. And yeah, it just felt, man, like that had to have contributed to the defense being gassed a little bit at the end, where it's just the offense just wasn't able to get anything going. And the Dolphins are going on these long drives that were just eating away at the clock and eating away at the defense's morale, I think, a little bit. And the fact that for as explosive as the Ravens offense was on the scoreboard, the fact that they just couldn't dictate the game's tempo at all, that's, I think, where you ultimately get that feeling of inevitability that you mentioned. That's another word that I kind of got hung up on. And yeah, just as much as I think the defense does deserve the blame in this one, the lack of a solid running game through the first two games is very concerning, to your point.
And I think one of the things that made it such a frustrating way for this Ravens team to go out was the fact that we have seen them so many times when they've needed a drive to take 8, 9, 10 minutes off the clock to kind of seal out a game with the running game. They've done it, and we've seen it happen. But in this circumstance, we just saw a team that could not get anything going on the ground. The Dolphins started, the momentum, it began to creep on their side. They have a couple of those long plays. The offense can't respond. You mentioned the time of possession, the long drives Miami had. Miami held the ball for 34 minutes and 47 seconds. Baltimore just for 25 minutes and 13 seconds. Usually we see that flipped a little bit in Baltimore's favor, but also, Jake, I think the third down and fourth downs, especially conversion rates for this team was something that you can't look over as well. 3 for 10 on third down. The 1 for 3 on fourth down is the one that sticks out, though, because you have the ball at the Miami 4-yard line. You have 4 plays to get it in. Baltimore cannot do that. Then late in the game, there's the debate. Should John Harbaugh have just punted that football away or gone for it on fourth down? You can always look at it in hindsight, but What's your overall reading on this fourth down offense? Because it isn't just a week 2 thing. This has been going on where the Ravens have struggled in some of these short yardage situations dating back to last season.
Yeah, it's interesting because it feels like the people are very, very kind of zealous or overzealous with this fourth down conversation, where it feels like, the math, quote unquote, analytics guys are like, go for it every single time, no matter what. That's the smart thing to do. And then you've got the football guys that are like, oh, no, you just got to feel out the situation of the game. And I'm kind of maybe somewhere in the middle at this point, where I was very pro going for it on fourth down in 2019 and 2020 when you had this bullying offensive line. But since then, man, it just feels like you take away some of those pieces like Orlando Brown and Marshall Yanda retiring, and it just feels like it's not going to be as easy to get that yard or those 2 yards when you need them. And for all his I think, amazing qualities, Lamar Jackson is not a good quarterback sneaker. So that takes away one element of a fourth and short offense that I think is very useful it has been for guys like Tom Brady and Drew Brees. Lamar just doesn't really have that. So when you go out there and the team knows that you're going to do QB power one way or the other, or you're just going to try and run it up the middle, hat on a hat, eventually that's going to be predictable and it's going to be easy to stop.
And I think when talking about just how the struggles have been so costly in some of these situations, you look at the fourth down on the 1 yard line. That is a pure, John Harbaugh's definitely going. There was no doubt in my mind that offense was staying on the field for fourth down at the 1 yard line. But to me, Jake, it almost feels like if Baltimore gets into their own 40, their own 45, you could make an argument that, oh yeah, they might go for this because they have been such a favorable team and one of the leading going for it teams on fourth down. But I think throughout all this, and again, one of the frustrating things is how buried this outcome made Lamar Jackson's performance overall in this game. I mean, he had for all the downfalls of the fourth quarter, 21 of 29, 318 yards, 3 touchdowns for Lamar Jackson on the ground, 9 for 119 in the score. I mean, what do you think of his performance? Because I think that is a huge bright spot in an otherwise pretty ugly outcome.
Yeah, I mean, he's carrying this team right now, no question about it, on offense especially, and even on defense when you consider what went down yesterday. And it's a shame that they're not 2-0 after this, because if they were, I think the MVP conversation would be going on right now with this guy, and I think it still should be. But it's a narrative-driven award. He had his story 2-3 years ago, whatever it was at this point, and he's probably not going to win another one if not for an absolutely Herculean effort. But there would have been talk, just like there was around this time last season with him as a potential MVP. And he looks like one right now to me, and he's playing incredible. And it's just like I keep saying, it's a shame that they just were not able to play up to that. Really on, Kevin, 2 plays yesterday. If you make one of 2 plays against Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle or whoever it might be, you're walking out of there with, a win by a couple different points. And it's like, man, that really could have turned into something ugly. And well, brother, it turned into something ugly indeed.
Yeah, even a little more than ugly. And you could even point, there are a couple of, the Marcus Williams dropped interception where, he had a good game. He had 2 interceptions, but that third one probably ends the game there for the most part, you would think. But then the Dolphins score very quickly after that. And
sorry to cut you off, but I tweeted as soon as he dropped it, I was like, that is a killer. And they're going to convert this 3rd and 10. And what happens? They score a touchdown on the very next play. That is a killer. And you don't want to rely on 3 takeaways for your defense to have a good day or to at least get the requisite stops that they're trying to get. But it almost feels emblematic of where the NFL is right now, where offenses are just going to get their yards and you got to try to make splash plays. And good thing they signed Marcus Williams, because without him, that would have looked very ugly yesterday, or even uglier than it did.
Yeah, he's been great. I mean, you have a team that had 9 interceptions all of last season. Marcus Williams has 3 through his first 2 games, already a third of that total just in one player, which is great. But Jake, I think something that people were very interested to see is the connection Lamar Jackson was going to have with these young wide receivers. Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay. Haven't seen a ton of James Prochet. He was obviously inactive on Sunday. But the connection with Bateman and Duvernay, it is there, and it is real. How impressed have you been with those 2 guys so far?
I mean, so impressed. And makes me feel like I'm eating a little bit of crow right now, and that's a good thing because I was concerned about this group. And to an extent, I am still concerned about it. I mean, Devin Duvernay leaves the game with a concussion. All of a sudden, you're feeling a little bit thin right now with the issues that Prochet has been dealing with, and we just haven't seen him. So we don't know if he is up to stuff. But those 2 guys have been so far. Duvernay just looks like a pro to me. He looks like a legit number 2 option at the very least right now. And you saw him with the versatility with the return touchdown. He's still got that aspect to his game that we cannot forget about. So it's huge for him to come out and have the first couple weeks that he did. And speaking of Prochet, we saw him in that clip in week 1 where he said, this is supposed to be the weak spot of the team, and we got all the touchdowns. And I think that's maybe emblematic of the chips that they have on their shoulders, where they're, a relatively quiet group of guys here led by Bateman, who is quiet in his own right, but they let their play do the talking. And Bateman did not only with the long touchdown, the catch and run where he just splits the safeties and looked like prime Odell Beckham just running through the secondary there, but just an all-around good game for him, man. He was catching first downs. He just looks like a complete receiver that's able to beat guys off the line with clean release packages. And he's kind of your default number one. It's working out well. And then Duvernay, like I said, is looking like a number two. And with the way this offense is constructed, you really only need to get that out of two wide receivers. So if they can stay healthy, praying that Duvernay is able to come back and do so, then I think they're in a good spot with these guys.
Yeah, and I know how important it is, obviously, to talk about the performance of the players, but I want to hit on all three coaches, big coaches, with you here in these three segments. So on offense, that is Greg Roman, and I know a very controversial figure throughout all of Ravens Twitter. But what did you see from him? Is this a game we saw some creativity with the Mark Andrews sneak on a short yardage situation to pick up 3 yards? Was there any difference to you in the play calling you saw early versus what you saw late?
The play calling, the buzzword vault is thrown around a ton. And it's interesting because it looked like he was opening up the vault a little bit. He did the Mark Andrews carry. He was, bringing guys in motion, bringing Likely across the formation to protect on what was a third down throw for a first down Bateman. And I think less than the play calling is overall kind of the schematic approach that we saw him take, where it's putting Lamar Jackson under center. Finally, this is something we've been talking about since the beginning of last season when they wanted to do it, but then Jackson gets COVID in training camp, and that throws a wrench into that. So you're kind of stuck with what you had been doing. They start doing that. And then ultimately, what really, really sticks out to me as the overall thing right now so far that has made Jackson look the most impressive to me is the fact that he looks in complete and total command of this offense. And it speaks to the confidence that Roman has in him, which is huge, where he's going out there and he's pointing out what the defense is doing. He's making calls at the line of scrimmage. He's very vocal. He sounds like, I made the prime Peyton Manning comparison where Peyton's just barking orders right down until the clock winds all the way down. And it was good to see after a performance in week one where they were still doing the same thing that they had been doing, where they're taking forever to get to the line. It felt like much more in control, in command in that first half, where he's going out there, he's pointing guys out, he's making checks at the line and fixing problems. So I think the fact that they're that in sync right now is really what has me as excited as I've been about Greg Roman's prospects as this coordinator in a long time.
Lamar Jackson, he looks confident out there. We see the crisp throws. We've seen him bulk up, and that has not, contrary to some popular belief, somehow impacted his ability, his electricity as both a thrower or a runner, which I don't know where that came from, but it's fine. And I think for Baltimore, it's important to have him, again, with a clean pocket because we know what he can do from the pocket and how impressive a passer he is. And obviously, Greg Roman does play a huge part in that offense. He's a big part of it. So hopefully he can continue to at least improve, and Jackson and Roman can continue to be on the same page. Coming up here, though, on the show, we're going to be diving into the defensive collapse that Baltimore had in their Week 2 game against Miami. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Turo. And Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want wherever you want it from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the U.S., Canada, and the U.K. Book a spacious SUV or a minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B. You can test drive the new electric vehicle you've had your eye on and see how it fits your everyday life. And many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every ship is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Ditch boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com. We're back here with our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with Jake Louque of Baltimore Beatdown. And Jake, for as good as Lamar Jackson was, the defense was pretty bad in the fourth quarter, and that's putting it very, very lightly. We talked about the inevitability, and I tweeted out late when the Dolphins tied the game, the Ravens offense has to run the clock all the way out and score at the end of the game because you just cannot trust the defensive performance that they've been putting on in this fourth quarter. A 21-point lead down the drain. I mean, there's a lot you can pin this on. What are some of the key areas you're most concerned about leaving this fourth quarter?
Yeah, communication has to be the number one thing. Where you have Kyle Hamilton and Jalen Armour-Davis and whatever, whoever knows what's going on with I think it was the Waddle touchdown on the left. You've got the right side where Tyreek Hill just runs by Hamilton and just completely free for a touchdown on the right side. Those were kind of the two backbreaking plays. And you got guys just lining up God knows where for God knows what reason. And then after the plays are made, they're all pointing at each other and screaming and yelling. It's like, well, you guys can point at each other and scream and yell all you want, but you got to communicate. You got to be more organized. You got to have a better feel for this. And I think that goes to Mike Macdonald for one thing, to kind of get away from what he had been doing early in the game, where he was not doing the Wink Martindale thing. He was sitting back, he was dropping 8 guys, sometimes 9 guys into coverage, and he was just willing to let the Dolphins take their dink and dunk. But I think the moment maybe got a little bit too big for him, and he said, all right, I'm going to start sending the house. I'm going to try to put 2 on his butt, and I'm going to try to close this game out. And with a gassed defense that is already having their issues, covering guys throughout the game, that, certainly reared its ugly head is not a great strategy, because he just completely diced them up. And a couple of them were lollipop, lucky, rainbow plays that you're going to make sometimes. And credit to Tua for being able to take advantage. But yeah, it's concerning from the Mike Macdonald perspective. For me, it's concerning from the John Harbaugh perspective. And that's what I wrote about today. I'm the biggest John Harbaugh fan in the world, but this is a systemic issue, it feels like, going back to last season. You fired Wink Martindale to fix this issue, and you brought in a 34-year-old coordinator who some, myself included, think might be your protege that you want to take over for you. You brought him in as a relatively big gamble. And you know what else happened? You restocked that cupboard for him in the secondary. And I know guys were hurt and they weren't out there. And that's a big part of the reason why those big plays were made, where Marlon Humphrey's not on the field. I totally get it. So I don't want to overstress the fact that this is a coaching issue, which it is, but the fact that those guys aren't out there didn't help. But yeah, it just feels like John Harbaugh has got to get in the lab, and he's got to have some pride here. And I think that he's going to, but he's got to stand behind the controversial decision that he made to get rid of Martindale, put Macdonald in there, and get the grocery shopping list out and ready for him. And it felt like all of that happened, and it felt like things were set up for them to succeed from day one. And so far, the results are not very good.
Yeah, and I think I completely agree. The fact that you know what Tyreek Hill is, you know what Jalen Waddle is, and I thought they did a good job of containing the deep ball early. And it's something that we kind of saw them do for a lot of last year when Martindale wasn't blitzing, which is a rare occurrence, by the way. But you have kind of like the bend, don't break defense between the 20s, where they'll give up some short stuff and then tighten up in the red zone and allow a field goal. That's what you want to do against a Miami team that, with one swing, and the Dolphins had about 3 or 4 of these. Tyreek Hill can beat you for 40, for 60. Jalen Waddle can do the same thing. You want to keep those guys in front of you. And if you have to say, hey, Tyreek Hill, go get 10 yards on a slant instead of a 60-yard touchdown, I think you take that. And I think at the end of the game, we saw some disguises, but it turned into too many disguises at the end of the game, where I think he was getting a bit too cute with things. And I think this is, again, it has to be a learning experience, because it cannot go on that way. You're right, Jake. The Ravens should be 2-0 right now, 35-14. First of all, you think 35, let alone 38 points is enough to win you a football game regardless, but it was just the Dolphins were ripping off. It wasn't like at the end of the game, the Dolphins were holding the ball for 10 minutes. They were ripping off these huge plays, and that was part of it. And I agree also in the fact that the secondary the cupboard was bare. They barely had anybody available in the cornerback room. You had 3 guys healthy at the end of the game. It was Marcus Peters, who hadn't played in over 600 days, Jalen Armour-Davis, who was really getting his first real NFL action, and then Daryl Worley, who had been called up from the practice squad just a couple of days earlier. So you're working with some stuff there, and that's where I want to go next, and we'll talk about this in the third segment. But I mean, this is a recurring issue where my saying is the Ravens have 50 million corners to start the year every year. They end the year with 2. They're already at 2, and we're going into week 3. How concerned are you about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's very concerning. And I mean, it goes back to, like I said, it feels like a systemic issue from last year. And I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm in a spot where I feel like they're going to continue to get to full strength. Like, I think Peters is going to continue to get better. I think Marlon, hopefully he'll get over whatever's ailing him, and he's able to get back to 100% strength too, because he looked good at times in that game. And you know what? Like, Armour-Davis and Williams looked good too. Like, they had their moments in that game where they were coming downhill. They were making plays. They made plays in coverage. Like, they looked like very good draft picks to me for coming out there in week 1 and, as 4th round, 5th round draft picks, whatever they were, and making plays on the ball, looking confident, looking assertive. It just gets lost in that 4th quarter where they look lost, to kind of repeat the term there. But I don't know. My concern level, it's definitely there because of the track record of, feeling a little bit of PTSD as a Ravens fan, going all the way back to 2014 when they just couldn't keep a healthy cornerback room together. But, my gut tells me things are going to settle in here a little bit. So I don't want to overreact to that.
Right. And I agree with you. I think that both Pepe Williams and Jalen Davis. I mean, you saw Pepe Williams hit stick Tyreek Hill, kind of shove him back on what would have been a first down. Armour Davis had a couple of nice pass breakups, but I mean, you're right. Going back to 2014, they were signing guys off the street to play the Patriots in the divisional round that year, and it was so rough to kind of go through that and to see them invest so much money in their secondary to have these guys in and out. And look, injuries happen. This is football. I'm not going to blame a guy for getting injured. That's like, it's a contact sport. It's going to happen. I think part of it, though, the inconsistency, I want to call it now, it's the pass rush, because we saw in week 1 dominant pressure throughout the entire game on Joe Flacco. Really not a lot of room for him to run or do anything in terms of just escaping the pocket. But week 2, the Ravens didn't really get a ton of that pressure. I mean, where are you with the pass rush and how they looked from week to week, from week 1 to week 2?
Yeah, it is. It's kind of frustrating to me because you go out there and you make that investment in Odafe as a first-round pick. You want to get sack production from that guy. I understand the whole idea of, we're going to manufacture pressure and we're going to, get coverage sacks and we're going to do all this and that. It's like, at the end of the day, you got to have a guy that's able to line up at least one-on-one and sometimes beat double teams and go and get sacks. And we saw that from Justin Houston a little bit yesterday, but always going to have to be that guy sooner or later. Like, he's going to have to turn into it. He's had flashes throughout his career so far where it looks like he's going to be. And he had a nice game in week 1, I think, too. But you can't go out there and be relatively invisible in the way that he was yesterday. Where's Justin Madubuike in that game yesterday, where he goes out there in week 1 and it's like, oh my God, this guy's an absolute wrecking ball. You got Calais Campbell talking about him as a potential all-pro. Well, you know what all pros do? They play consistently week to week to that level. And I'm not expecting that every single week. I get it. But it just feels like when you need a play, you don't really have a guy that you can be confident and say, oh, well, that guy's going to go make a play right now. Houston, I'd be confident in at times, but he's a little bit older and always going to really have to show it to me, as are Madubuike, as are some of these other guys that they are counting on to bring down the quarterback and just haven't done it at consistent of enough of a clip for me.
Yeah, and I think when you have such a talented defensive line, and you mentioned the investments they have made in that position, bringing back Calais Campbell, they drafted Madubuike in the 3rd round of 2020. They bring in Michael Pierce, who I thought had a solid game on Sunday against the Dolphins. You also have Travis Jones, who I think will make an impact when he's able to get back onto the field. But then they're so deep there, you just want to see more sack production from in a game like this, when a sack would have probably turned the tides of the game. And the Ravens did have just one of them, and it was Justin Houston. So I think, positive wise, Justin Houston had a good game. Marcus Williams with his game as well. Those are 2 guys. Also Pepe Williams and Jalen Davis too. But coming up, we'll talk about just where the Ravens go from here, if they have to make any additions at certain position and more. So be sure to stay tuned. We still have a ton to talk about here on the show. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about Prize Picks. And fantasy has been a part of my life for a super long time. I've really enjoyed doing it. And for Prize Picks, it's super easy. You can have multiple different entries. You can pick 2 to 5 players, and if they'll go score more or less in their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport that you watch, including NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, PGA, college football, college basketball, and so much more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. You have safe and fast withdrawals. They're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app. Go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive 100% instant deposit match with $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. You deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. We're back here. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Allshaker still here with Jake Louque of Baltimore Beatdown. And Jake, the number one concern personnel-wise, I would say, there's a lot of talk about the secondary, but John Harbaugh does announce on Monday that Steven Means is down for the year with a torn Achilles, another Achilles injury to that outside linebacker room. It leaves them right where they were just a couple weeks ago. 2 healthy outside linebackers on this roster. They also released Kyler Fackrell from the practice squad, so really it's just Odafe, Justin Houston, and then Jeremiah Moon is on the practice squad. Something has to be coming here, right?
It has to be. I mean, it felt like they maybe would have signed Fackrell for this reason, and the fact that they get rid of him today, I don't know. I mean, he was on the practice squad, so it's not like they were making room or anything, but they had been in contact with JPP. He was in their building. So, yeah, if it is going to be Jason Pierre-Paul, that's fine with me. You do have reinforcements coming within house, too. I actually joked about it the other night on Twitter, but, I saw Tyus Bowser in person. I got to talk to him a little bit, and it seems like he's doing well moving around. So, hopefully he'll be back, as soon as he can be. And then obviously you got David Ojabo waiting in the wings as well. But with the way things are looking now, I'm not saying that it's getting late early, but you got a couple relatively tough games. You got to go up to Foxborough and you got to get a win without those guys. And you got to probably beat the Buffalo Bills without those guys at home. Those are tough games. And if it is going to be JPP, then that's fine with me. That's a name. That's a guy that's been in the league. That's a veteran. That's a guy who knows how to get sacks. So if you want to go ahead and make that your move, I'm okay with it.
And it's a guy who has inside-outside versatility, too. If you need to move him inside, you can, but he can also play on the outside. He's done both throughout his career, both with the Giants and with Tampa Bay. And I think it's a little frustrating because Tyus Bowser, I think, solves a lot of the issues that the Ravens are going through right now at the position with his versatility. He showed that he can be a sack guy. He led them in sacks last year, which I don't think a lot of people had on their bingo cards. So he proved that in more in more opportunities. And I think that it happened in Week 18, the last game of the year, just a terrible end to a terrible injury season. But Jake, looking at the corner room, I know we talked about it a little bit, but the Ravens were sniffing around Xavier Howard at the trade deadline last year. They were in a little bit of a different situation there last year than they were this year, obviously with Marcus Peters being done for the year last season. But is there any chance in your mind that Baltimore could go out there and maybe look to a Joe Hayden on the open market, maybe bring back a Jimmy Smith for a throwback, or even go out there and make a trade for a high-level corner? Because we've seen them use 3 cornerback rotations before with high-level players like Marlon Humphrey, Brandon Carr, and Jimmy Smith, and even the Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, Jimmy Smith trio.
Yeah, Joe Hayden is kind of an interesting name to me. I don't know where that name kind of came from. I like the guy a lot, but it's just that's not who I would think of. Like if I were to do anything, and I'm not sure I would probably go for Jimmy Smith, but he might not want to do it at this point. He said that the Ravens are the only team he would play for. So if he has that itch, I don't know, why not sign him up for a year? But it just feels like to me, maybe just like ride it out with the guys that you got if you can. If you have to make a move, then go ahead and make it Jimmy Smith. Go and make it Joe Hayden if you have to. I'm okay with it. I just I wouldn't even know what to tell you what to expect of those guys at this point. Is kind of where I'm at and kind of where this cornerback room is unfortunately at.
Right. The Ravens have a bunch. Even on the practice squad, you have our Darius Washington there who can come up and maybe play some slot if you need to. Pepe Williams impressed in the slot. I think he was just dealing with some cramps. So his late game exit, I don't think is anything of concern unless I missed something huge, which I hope I didn't. But I think also Brandon Stevens, whereas he had in his injury, John Harbaugh said he looked good in his workout on Sunday. So he's a versatile guy. Marlon Humphrey's obviously really important to that team as well. But Jake, we talked about John Harbaugh a little bit and just what he has to do to get his team back on track. You mentioned some key points, but what do you think are maybe the 2 or 3 biggest ones as this Ravens team you mentioned has to go up to Foxborough and play Bill Belichick, which is never easy?
Yeah, 2 or 3. It's so much to me at this point. It's so much to me to have a guy like that who's been there for 15 years and who has seen the highs and the lows. He's been 5-11. He's won a Super Bowl. He knows what it takes to bounce back from things like this. So I don't know, man. I wish I could point to something schematic. Like I said, it just feels like things like that happen in games sometimes. It's unfortunate that it all happened in one quarter and it cost you a win. But if anyone is going to be able to screw guys' heads on straight and make them play for him and be the motivator that he is, it's going to be John Harbaugh, I think. So I think he's going to get their heads to where they need to be. It does, to me, come down to him figuring out what's going on with this coaching staff, where you got Greg Roman, who's your run game specialist, who is supposed to provide a floor to this run game. He's not providing that floor right now. He's not helping you on 4th and short when you need to be able to gain 1 yard. He's not able to do that with a restocked offensive line to an extent. Mike McDonald, this guy that you brought in to prevent these late game collapses, and all the guys that you brought in to help him do that as far as personnel, he wasn't able to do that the other day. To me, it comes to having a little bit of a mafioso type sit down with those 2 coordinators and say like, hey guys, let's figure this thing out. Let's game this out. Let's have contingency plans in place. Let's spend more time in the office this week, and let's do what we need to do to ensure that, if nothing else, that doesn't happen. Like maybe we go up to Foxborough and lose this week, but that is not going to happen. And I think when you're talking about a team that is not making a ton of mistakes with this, this Ravens team, at least, I think they're talented enough to go up against anybody in the league. So if you can just kind of eliminate that margin, that huge margin of error that we saw on Sunday, then, lower that ceiling for mistakes a little bit, I think you'll be in a much better spot moving forward. So as much as I've been kind of a little, pretty angry, pretty livid, which is not a emotion that I usually default to in general, especially not when it comes to football, but I've been feeling that way. I feel like I'm ready to settle in now and kind of put my faith in these guys because they've done it before. I think they'll do it again.
Yeah, and we've seen the strengths and weaknesses of this team throughout the years, how they change. And I know right now, Jake, we did talk about the run game and how it is a major weakness. I mean, what do you do in this situation? Is this something where you just have to wait and hope that J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards can come back and be their normal selves? They're going to have a bit of a ramp up period time, even when they get back on the field. Do they have to bring somebody else in? Is this an offensive line issue, a scheme issue? Where do you look? Or you could even say all of it combined. Is it even all of it combined here?
Yeah, I think it probably has to be, right? It just feels like, and it usually is kind of that cliche to say that it is everything, but it is everything right now. It's not having enough push on the left side of the offensive line, and to an extent the right side at times as well. That's a little bit of a talent issue. Ronnie Stanley's not out there. You're not putting Nick Boyle out there for reasons that elude me to an extent. J.K. Dobbins would probably help you with that. Gus Edwards would probably help you with that. Well, Gus isn't coming back for the first 6 weeks, right? And then J.K., hopefully you'll get him out there. Boyle, hopefully you'll get him out there. And that's going to open up your playbook probably a little bit and give you a little bit more confidence to be able to run what Greg Roman wants to run. And I'll also be interested to see what those guys look like in the new looks that he's executing, where it's Lamar under center, going out of that I formation, going out of the strong a lot more often. I'll be interested to see what those guys bring to those looks. So bring them back into the picture, get that new play calling together. Hopefully it'll be a nice kind of elixir of good things to come for this offense on the ground.
Yeah, and my final question for you, Jake, is defensive oriented. We heard John Harbaugh talk about the youth that the Ravens had to rely on Sunday. Guys like Kyle Hamilton and Pepe Williams and Jalen Armour-Davis. It didn't really single anyone out, obviously, but do you feel like this defense can win? They have so much talent. The youth is so talented, but if they have to rely on these rookie, second-year guys in high-level situations because maybe injuries happen in a game like we did see, are you confident they can win more games than not with that talent?
I mean, yeah, it just depends on how many games that you're talking about. If you have to like run the full gamut with them, that's probably going to be kind of tough. But like I said, and like we talked about, like I think I saw enough from them that I'd be confident that if they have to hold it down out there for a game or two, I think I'd be okay. You know, they were relatively highly touted prospects for where they got picked, or at least Armour-Davis was. And then Williams was kind of one of these stars of the preseason. And for most of that game, he looked like it to me. So, yeah, I'm confident enough that if it comes down to a couple game stretch, they can hang in there for sure.
No, I'm with you 100%. Even Kyle Hamilton was expected to go nowhere near where he went with Baltimore. He was a top 5, top 7 guy in a lot of people's opinions. He falls to 14. And look, there are some things that he has to work on, some struggles he's had early on, but this again was a second full NFL game. So I think at the end of the day, these guys, if they have to hold it down for a couple of games, I'd be okay with it. I think they have the talent and they're learning from some talented guys there as well. But Jake, that's all I have for you here today. Thank you so much for hopping on, joining me. Please tell people where they can find you on social media, what you're working on, and all those links again will be in the description below on YouTube.
Yeah, check out the Baltimore Beatdown podcast if you're not already listening. I'm sure we have a little bit of an overlap in listenership, but if you're not, you can find it wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter at Podcast Beatdown. That's the show's account where we're tweeting out content, memes, all that good stuff. And I am at Jake Louque, and that's spelled Louque.
Awesome. Thank you again, Jake. Again, check out Jake's work. It will be in the description below on YouTube. He does a lot of good work also with a friend of the show, Spencer Schultz, who I want to one day do a 3-person show with you and Spencer both on there. I think that would be awesome content here for Locked On Ravens. Jake, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining me again. And thank you for listening to Locked On Ravens today. That's all I have for you here today on the show. I'm going to get back here tomorrow. We'll be diving into more Ravens content, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And I will see you right back here tomorrow.